session preview with Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins. I don't think that will be the last public event we'll ever have in that space, but if so, we can certainly say we went out strong. And though today's discussion is virtual, it is with undiminished pleasure that I would say I'm happy to be joined by the senator from the 35th District. Leader, how are you?
I'm doing well, and I hope that we certainly will not say that that was the last discussion. I so enjoyed being there, and we will be back.
You brought out a big crowd. So how is the Omicron surge treating you and yours? I'm sure it's a great challenge to lead a majority conference in the best of times, but dealing with everything presented by the pandemic has got to be even more difficult.
You know, it really is. And thank you for asking. I hope that you and your family are well and trying to navigate this Omicron the way we all are. We, as you know, are back in session, but we are still virtual. We are allowing for virtual options because, frankly, the Omicron virus, although it seems to be less deadly, and you know, it is still extremely transmissible. And as we speak, two of my grandsons are getting over the virus. My son-in-law has it, and you know, we are just all scrambling, trying to make sure that people stay safe. Everybody is vaccinated. I give my public service announcement all the time. Please use the tools that we have. Get vaccinated, get boosted, wear your masks, and we will be able to get through it. But it is definitely an issue for all of us. And as you know, however, the business must go on. And so we are just happy that we indeed have remote options in order to fulfill our tasks.
So when we scheduled this discussion, I don't think we really were aware that it would fall a day after Governor Kathy Hochul introduced her first budget proposal. The bills, of course, were introduced last night. The devil always kind of being in the details. I would be remiss if I didn't start off by asking for your initial thoughts on her budget blueprint.
Well, you know, we have a good start because we are definitely rowing in the same direction. It is always good when the legislature and the chief executive look at the issues and realize what's important. And obviously, recovering from COVID is important. Obviously, boosting our economy, getting people back to work safely. Obviously, broadband, the environment, housing, childcare. There are so many things that she has put in her budget that are very, very resonant with not only our conference, but also I think with New Yorkers. So as you said, the devil is always in the details, but at least we are looking at the same details. And I believe we'll be able to get to a great budget that will be something that New Yorkers, again, will be able to build on and move forward with.
It's often said that that it is easier to negotiate a budget in hard times, in lean times, because of course everybody knows that the resources are not abundant on the shelves. This year, though obviously the state is facing considerable difficulties and is of course recovering or hoping to recover from the pandemic, we are flush with this kind of one-time shot of post-pandemic aid, which is something that the governor acknowledged in her budget presentation. So I guess, do you foresee this being a flush time difficult budget, or a lean time great challenges easy budget negotiation?
Well, Casey, I think you and I know that none of these things are easy. Whether they're flush or whether they're lean, they're never easy. And as I always said, I have never had a quote unquote normal year since I've been here. I always quote the former governor, Eliot Spitzer, who said, day one, everything changes. I came in when he came in 2007. There has never been any one year that looked like the next. And so I don't assume anything is easy because it just has not been. And I said that to the governor. I had dinner with her last night, and I told her we're all hoping for the best, and I'm glad we're at least rowing in the same direction. That being said, the lean budgets weren't that easy either, because again, depending upon what the priorities are. So if your priorities are to look at during the lean times of the most vulnerable population, and then maybe the chief executive thinks it's not really what they should be looking at. Maybe they should be looking at other play. Then the fight is, how do we make sure that we have a budget with extraordinary small resources that actually doesn't harm people or harm certain groups of people while helping others. So that's never easy. And being flush, as you said, everybody says, oh, well, this is something that we hadn't been able to do for decades, and this is our moment, and let's try and do it now. So our job, obviously, is, as I said, I think government's job is, frankly, to pay attention to the needs, and certainly the needs of the most vulnerable. I think people are understanding the importance of government intervening when it's necessary in order to make sure that everything continues to move forward. So I try and manage expectations. I think we've done an incredible job in the majority since I've been, leader in 2019. We took the majority, as you know, and a lot of these longstanding issues we have tried to grapple with, whether it is the education funding that, was stalled because despite a lawsuit that was found that indeed poorer school districts had been deprived for years of the funding they should have. The former majority would never actually address it because of the amount of money. It was billions and billions of dollars, of course, that these school districts in poor areas had been deprived of. But both the speaker and I knew that this was that moment while people saw all the inequities that the coronavirus laid bare. And we have, at this point, congressional partners in the majority leader, Senator Schumer and Senator Gillibrand, and a congressional delegation that was supportive. We had resources, and it was time now to pay those debts. Those kids who came through the system for years have graduated and hopefully are living a good life. But we want to make sure that the kids that come behind them are not still strapped with the inadequacies of those former budgets. So we had to do that. And then we looked at the fact that universal pre-K makes a difference. And they called it universal pre-K, but the fact is it was basically New York City and some suburban districts outside of New York City. It was not universal. So then we looked at how do we make sure that we stabilize incoming students so they'll be able to perform. So I know this is a long way of saying that there are a lot of things that had been unaddressed for a very long time. And I do believe that we have been able to begin addressing these things comprehensively and sustainably, but I also try and manage expectations that every wrong will not be righted, within a year or 2 years or 3 years, but I think we're on a good path.
I just pause here to note that if anyone has questions about anything that comes up in the discussion, please put them in the chat, either on Facebook or on YouTube. We'll be monitoring those, and we'll try to address a couple of them in sort of the last act of this discussion. You noted that you and the governor had dinner last night. I don't even know if Speaker Hasty is in town, or was it just the two of you?
Well, it's just the two of us. I'm sure the speaker will, get an invitation if he hasn't already
No
had
doubt.
one.
No doubt. Well, that actually kind of puts the ball on the tee for my next question. Michelle Del Rey, who's an outstanding addition to our Capitol Bureau, wrote the cover story for the Upstate Business magazine, which sort of explored the impact of the fact that this is going to be the first budget in state history that will be negotiated at the top level by two women, as well as, of course, Speaker Hastie. Now, 2 years ago, when we had our last in-person discussion, you and I discussed the issue back when you were the first woman in the proverbial room. And you noted, now, and you might not have used this specific term, that there was a fair degree of kind of toxic machismo that had been kind of baked into the process. So my question now in January 2022, what's more significant, that this will be the first budget to be negotiated by two women, or that it's the first budget in a decade that won't be negotiated by Andrew Cuomo?
I can't even choose. I think both of those things, you are so astute, are equally, significant. It is really historic, obviously, to have two women in the room out of the, what was the proverbial three men in a room. And that is always the speaker, the majority leader, and the governor. And for the very first time, two of the three roles are occupied by women. So that is extremely significant. And the fact that it's not Andrew Cuomo is also significant. But I said, I think the most significant thing is, I can't underscore enough, is that, there is and at least a willingness that the governor has continued to express to be collaborative. There is a willingness to appreciate the fact that the legislature is a co-equal branch of government, and that when we work together, can be very, very productive. So I appreciate that, which frankly, I think is probably the most significant part, more than who's there or more than who isn't there. The spirit of collaboration is the most important thing in governing.
So to kind of dig into some of the issues that are going to animate the session, there's been a lot of data dropped by the Division of Criminal Justice Services in recent weeks concerning rearrest rates in the first year after the slate of criminal justice reforms were passed by the legislature and signed by the governor, which was one of the major policy initiatives, as you noted, passed by the Democratic majority after you came into the majority in 2019. Now, both sides of this debate have derived their own interpretations from that data, but where do you come down on what those numbers suggest about whether there need to be tweaks made, in particular to the bail changes that were put into effect?
Well, first of all, I have to commend the Times Union for spending the time and looking at the data and actually making sure that the conversation about bail has at its core information that people may or may not have anymore, because I think there's been a tremendous campaign, frankly, of misinformation around bail and bail reform. And I always like to begin the discussion by resetting why we did it. We didn't just wake up and say, oh, by the way, let's try and find, ways to change bail. This has been the result of what we all know, or certainly and your readers know, that this is the result of a disparate impact negatively, specifically on Black and Brown communities. It was a position where people were being held. Bail was originally supposed to be if you were a flight risk, and all of a sudden it became, in many ways, a prosecution if you were poor. So if you had money, you could get out. If you didn't have money, you stayed in. And we all remember Khalif Browder, who was unfortunately this glaring example of a young person who had been accused of stealing a backpack. He was never convicted. He said he didn't do it. He wound up spending 3 years in prison. Most of the time, this was in Rikers Island, most of the time in solitary confinement. And why? Because he didn't have the money to get out on bail. And ultimately, when he did leave, he was so emotionally disturbed that he killed himself. And Kalief Browder is one of too many thousands and thousands of people who accused of minor crimes can't pay $100, a few $100s, $1,000, and they're in there. And we did not want to criminalize poverty. We want criminals to be, certainly brought to justice, but we certainly don't want to criminalize poverty. And that's why we did the bail reform. And the bail reform is nonviolent felonies and misdemeanors. So there are still, lots and lots of bailable different crimes that you will have bail for. And I also remind people that we watched the trial of Kyle Rittenhouse. Kyle Rittenhouse shot 3 people, 2 of them were killed, and he was out on bail. And I don't hear anybody saying, oh, that's a problem. But that's the reality of how this system works. So we needed to do something that changed it, and we did. Now, your paper made sure to indicate that this is the data. And after some looking at it more carefully, we now know that 98% of the people who get out without bail do not commit any serious crime, while they're awaiting their trial. And I want to say behind those numbers are people who are now still able to go to work, now still able to maintain housing, now still able to support their families. And you don't have the crumbling that happens around people who are held indiscriminately just because they don't have a few bucks for a minor accusation, able to continue to function in the society until their day in court. They are still going to go to court. 98% of them do, and they don't commit any crimes. So, I think that we have to look at the perspective. It's always hard to change a system that has been the way and the people have been able to build on. I mean, there's a lot of people who have been able to, unfortunately, profit sometimes on the fact that poor people, are held because they're poor. I don't want to be part of the system. That speaker doesn't want to be part of that system. And I think we'll look at the data. We will continue to look at the data. And obviously, the data will allow us and inform us if there is something else we have to do.
So I don't want to overinterpret myself your remarks, but I am not hearing a great willingness to, for example, look at, as some people have suggested, adding dangerousness to a community as a potential, putting that back as a reason to deny someone bail, for example.
Well, you're hearing what I'm saying, which is, let's look at the data. I mean, listen, the sad part of people's, the sad part of how this sentencing has worked, how this justice system has worked, and again, it's not me, it is the data that says that a Black person committing the same crime as a white person, the majority of the time, this Black person is sentenced for longer time. The bail is higher. There has been a disparity in the treatment for the same crime, depending upon, sadly, the color of a person's skin. If you're Black, if you're brown, if you're poor, or whatever, you wind up spending more time and spending more money. And so we've seen what the system has produced when allowed to produce outcomes. And we don't want to continue to perpetuate outcomes because people think that somebody's dangerous and therefore they should be held, and somebody else who isn't. And I'll go back to Kyle Rittenhouse. You know, obviously nobody thought he was dangerous because he was out. So I don't know how that works, but I know how it has worked, and that has to stop.
You know, of course, the argument from the Republicans in both houses, as well as, of course, statewide, is that you know, the proponents of bail reform and the criminal justice changes are pointing out exactly what you're pointing out, that the percentage of those who are rearrested for violent felonies is very small. The counter argument to that the Republicans are making is that, well, it's very small unless you or someone in your family are the victim of one of those, you know, violent felons who are rearrested.
Yeah, but the thing is, they haven't been able to tell me when the bail system was in place as it was before.
That's very true.
How many people, so there's no control there. How many people get out on bail and get rearrested because they actually did something. I mean, we all don't, nobody is supporting criminality or criminals. Nobody. I think that they have been able to take a talking point. Obviously, people fear. Obviously, we care about public safety, and nobody takes this lightly. But I believe that they've just decided to create, really a boogeyman. These people don't care about you. They just want criminals out. You're going to be, and just pandering to people's fears and not really being honest. And so when I have an opportunity to be honest, and I know that they don't have any compelling data that shows that everybody who was kept in on bail, they have nothing. So yeah, any crime is too much, but the reality is that I believe it's criminal to hold people merely because they don't have the money to get out. And certainly in the case where they're being held in a place like Rikers Island for years and years on an accusation is just wrong.
So moving from one kind of crime to another, the governor has proposed scrapping the state Joint Commission on Public Ethics and replacing it with a body that would be composed of kind of a rotating slate of the deans of state chartered law schools. And also making that change within the budget process. She came to the Times Union editorial board just yesterday and said that, while of course there's the constant debate about how much policy ought to be dropped into the budget, she makes the case that replacement for Jay Cope, of course, would need to be funded. So she believes that it's appropriate to do it in the budget negotiation. What do you think of her replacement plan? And do you think it should be done within the budget, or is it something that can wait for later in the session?
Well, we haven't really discussed her plan. I do know, however, our conference has, passed legislation to reform JCOB in a myriad of ways. And how do you actually make this an accountable, system that is not just, just a joke. So we need to, we know that we need to reform JCOB. We have not, as you go back to the devil's in the details, we have not started to discuss in depth her policy conversation. Again, we want changes made. We want the membership of the commission change. We want to be able to do things in a more streamlined way with simple majorities. We want a lot of different things. So, but we all want the same thing. We want JCOB to be accountable. So you're right. And that's why you're good at what you do, because you've looked at this long enough and you know the issues on all the sides. And yeah, there's always that discussion. Do you want to do policy that is very, that could be done outside of the budget, in the budget? Like, is that the best way to do it? I vary from, I prefer, I think as most of my colleagues do, to do budgetary things in the budget. I prefer to do policy things outside of the budget. And sometimes you can say, well, there is a reason to put it in the budget, even though it's a major policy difference. I'm always open to trying to get things done. And so depending upon how easily it can be done, inside or outside, that's kind of what I do. I don't have a hard, fast rule. But for Jacob, I am sure we will see major changes in this, because we need to have a body that actually can, do what it's purported to do, which is to hold us to ethical standards, and all of us, not just some of us.
Do you think, just kind of as a yes/no proposition, do you think Jacob needs to go? That it needs to be replaced? That it's not, you can't just change the rules. You've got to really take it out root and branch.
I think you could change it to be better. I mean, we need something, and I think that we can change it substantially so that it could be more like it was supposed to be. I don't think we have to destroy it to make it better. I think we could do it.
So something the Senate and the Assembly are going to be addressing really in the next few weeks is developing sort of the legislative version of redistricting maps after the deadlock of the independent, on the maps drawn up by the Independent Redistricting Commission, basically two dueling sets of maps. Do you think that body has proven itself to be a failure? We should note that you and Democrats didn't control the Senate when the former governor and the legislative leaders almost a decade ago established the current system.
Nor did we vote for it.
Right.
So because we saw the inherent flaws back then, and it was, again, something that the governor and the majority, at least in our House, that was composed of the independent Democrats and Republicans, came up with, as far as I could see, and there it went.
Your deputy leader's echoes of protest are probably still ringing across the Capitol.
It was difficult. I mean, really, we saw what was coming. However, we are in the process of following the Independent Redistricting Commission's, mandate. And as you rightfully said, we have been presented with dueling sets of map. They have had a number of public hearings and so on. And to that extent, I mean, that I think was important, that they go and they hear people from all over the state and talk about how lines should be drawn, what should be important, so on and so forth. And so they've sent us something, as you know, we did not accept that because it just wasn't acceptable. So they are back working to see if there is something that they can come up with that they will send to us, and then we will, look at that and make a judgment as to whether or not we will adopt the lines that they propose.
What to you looks like success in the drawing of those maps? A cynic would say that success, from your perspective, might look like more Democrats, winning in the redrawn districts. But I mean, I guess what are you and what is the conference hoping for in the composition of your own set of? I mean, Democrats will largely be able to carve up the state, almost any way they want. Of course, they would have to avoid legal challenges.
Right. I mean, I think that we understand what gerrymandering does and how awful it is. I mean, for example, in my own district, the 35th district, when I ran, it was held by a Republican. I think it had always been held by a Republican, except one kind of fluke when there was the Johnson landslide. Democrat won, and apparently it was just so confusing for the Democrats when they were in the majority for this short period of time that Governor Rockefeller had to pick their leader because they had been so ill prepared to be in the majority. So that being said, every time that it was redistricting time, the Republicans in the Senate had been in charge. And so my district was held by a Republican, but it was a rectangular shaped district. And I will say that the former governor, I remember well that he insisted that he would sign nothing that was not a nonpartisan redistricting effort. He said that. And then, of course, in 2010, you're smiling because you
Yes.
recall that, I bet. But then in 2010, after the election, it was the midterm after the Obama election, we lost the majority and the Republicans were in the position to draw the maps. When I first ran, there were 62 senators. By the time the Republican Senate got through with the map, there were now 63. And we were in the middle of a recession, by the way.
And I think there was also a Senate coup that I vaguely recall.
There was the coup. Oh yeah, but that was before they won. Remember, yeah. They were so upset that
whenever you remind me of a time when there were 62 senators, I get years of therapy can't erase that memory of being deadlocked.
I'm hoping that our tenure in the majority now helps to erase it in many ways, But yeah, they first there was a coup and then they actually won. And then they started to redraw the map. So they added a senator in places where there was no population growth. And they also made sure that every Republican had about 285,000 people to represent, while Democrats had about 315,000 people to represent. And my beautiful rectangular district is now the smiling face of an old man with a scraggly beard. You can look it up. Everybody look at 35. You will see. And I've named him after my district. I call him Yaskar White Rock Green. I have half of 3 cities. It's so we know what gerrymandering looks like. And we believe that, ultimately, we can draw just because of we could draw maps that make sense, that are contiguous, that are rational and reasonable if we had to do that. But and I believe it can be done. And as I said, we have certainly been subjected to the Republican Senate majority's gerrymandering of us. And we will do better if we have the opportunity to do it. Maybe the commission will do something right, but I'm sure all of it could be better than what's happened.
Yasker White Rock Green sounds like the name of a beat poet. So
I know. Well, if you look at him, because the scraggly beard definitely puts him in that position.
Yeah. So there's been some talk sort of related to all of the agita around, redistricting and the need to redraw the maps that once the maps are agreed upon, it could really tighten up the window in which there has to be petitioning
right.
and all that. And some have said that because of that, we need to re-separate the primaries, with the congressional primary, of course, being court mandated to go in June. Maybe we should push back the legislative primaries to afford more time to, for lawmakers to do that. Of course, there's already been complaints that, the fact that the primaries in late June really, pushes things up against the end of session. Do you agree with that idea, or are you still a fan of keeping the primary in June, late June, where it is right now?
I'm a fan of keeping it in June. We changed it because, as you indicated, the federal government had changed the primaries for our congressional races. And that was largely due to the need to make sure that the military ballots had enough time to be processed, et cetera. So they moved it to June years before we moved to June. And part of our moving it was because we had heard from voters who were saying that it was confusing. They were going to primaries, people were exhausted. They thought they voted already, then they had to come back. And of course, the cost. It was about $50 million to run the additional primary in September, and those resources could certainly be used to do other things. So of course, again, once we took the majority, we took that to heart. We follow the federal government. We've just, put both primaries in June. We have been able to save money, which we also were able to put into early voting, and allowing, because there was never early voting before we took the majority as well. And so we were, able to bolster a system and make it more accessible and try and keep the confusion out of it as to when you're voting, why you're voting, who you're voting for, what's going on. I am loath to change it every time something anomalous happens, because then you're only confusing people again. I mean, why is this such a movable situation? So we will be keeping it in June, and we will be adhering to the appropriate deadlines so that people will be able to, know what districts they're running in, and run for their seats.
So we're talking almost exactly a year after things really started to go downhill for the Cuomo administration. You were, I believe, the first statewide official to put out a statement calling for the former governor to step down. That he had, you said in a statement that I think was the first week, I believe, in March, that he really needed to relinquish office. It was actually the same day that the Times Union editorial board made the same call, as it turned out, and the same day that we ran Brendan Lyons's large investigation into a potential structural defect on the Governor Mario M. Cuomo bridge.
I remember that was something that really, that's in my district, by the way, the Mario Cuomo bridge. So it was that on top of that, but go ahead.
Well, it's a story we're continuing to work on. But I just ask you to kind of remember sort of your thinking back during those days and that weekend. Why you in particular felt the need to put out that statement. This was just, of course, a couple of days after Brittany Commisso's allegations had been reported on by Brendan Lyons. And of course, by the end of the week, about 5 days after your statement came out on that Sunday, the trickle of calls for him to resign had really turned into a torrent. So I just ask you to kind of take us back to what you were thinking back then, and also, has there been anything that has come out? Of course, the former governor, I should say, has offered, a fierce defense and has attacked the credibility of many of the women who have made allegations against him. Have you seen anything in what he has offered up to change your view of the credibility of those allegations?
Well, yeah, thank you for bringing us back, and again for I didn't realize it was the same day that the Times Union came out with their editorial statement that said the same thing. I mean, I don't take any of these things lightly. And I know that certainly I want to say to the women who came forward, I know how hard that had to be and how hard that is. And, it was just, it had, for me, as I was experiencing it, we had, I think there was the first woman that came forward, and then I think there were two, and then maybe three.
Yeah, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm going to correct myself. Your statement came out actually about 2 days, I believe, before Brittany Commisso's allegations were reported. There had still been several. There had been Charlotte Bennett's allegations, and I'm sorry. I just wanted to correct myself. Sorry. Yeah,
I just remember that there had been the first allegation, and then I think a second one. I remember being on, I think it was CNN, and I was on trying to discuss taking the executive powers back, because, COVID had been raging, and we had decided that kind of things were getting a bit much and we needed to rein in the governor's powers. I remember it quite well. And I was going on CNN to discuss reining in the governor's powers, which we were going to do that very day. And right before that, he came on and denied yet another allegation and so on. And I know that I was talking to the interviewer and we totally didn't talk about what I thought we were going to talk about because he had just made this apology. He was sorry and he was, he didn't, people took it wrong and so on. And so my whole interview was talking about the substance of the apology at that time anyway, that he was making. And so, I said then that, all right, I don't think apologies, go far enough. And clearly I knew that he was aware of where we had been, because we'd done legislation that talked about sexual harassment. And I remember he was jockeying to beat us. I mean, we were going to put the legislation on the floor and he had, a press conference with notable actresses talking about sexual. He understood where those boundaries were. And so, then there was another person and then there was the bridge. And for me, it had gotten in the nursing home things. We can't forget that. And the book. And it just became very, very clear to me that this had to stop. It was a distraction. And I felt that any person who was fending off this many allegations in this many areas had to be a little distracted. And, you have the fate of almost 20 million people in your hands during the budget time. Stop, move off of the stage and let us deal with the people of New York. So that's really what, and I'll tell you something on a personal note. My daughter was pregnant with twins, right, because she gave birth in March, and I was there at her house in the weekend. She has a 3-year-old, but we're all trying to, and the dog, sadly, their dog was being put down. So, I mean, it was just a lot going on. And I remember getting calls from the governor, and this is the weekend before. This is, I think it was like Saturday before, from the governor's office. So the conversation that they wanted to have, which I didn't, I wasn't ready to have, was to give me a heads up that there was yet another allegation coming. And what was wrong with that? So I was like, no more. So that's really what, it was a buildup, and it was a sense of everybody needs to stop. He needs to stop, and we need to get on with businesses, for New Yorkers.
I want to turn to a couple of questions that have been offered up by folks who are listening in. Assemblyman Richard Gottfried, who, if memory serves, has been in the Assembly since just before the Beatles broke up, is of course, will retire at the end of this year. And of course, his major piece of legislation for years and years has been the New York Health Act, which of course would establish a single payer healthcare system in the state. He says, this is going to be the year. Do you see that coming to the floor in the state Senate?
We have been talking about healthcare, obviously, especially during this time. It is very, very clear that access to healthcare, is important, and it's actually everything. We've started conversations, as we normally do, around the healthcare, looking at the different aspects about the New York Health Act. I think that there's nobody who does not want to say, I'm sick, let me have access to healthcare, let me not have to worry about the bills, let me let me just get the care I need so that I can move on with my life. Everybody wants that. And as you said initially, even when we were talking about the budget, the devil is in the details. And, we just want to make sure all the details, there was nothing worse than needing healthcare and not being able to have it. And so I don't want to say yes, I don't want to say no. I do want to say that we care about it. We're looking at it. We're talking about it. And if something like that could truly work, we would certainly want it to happen in nationally, though. I mean, as well as New York. I mean, I think that if it works, it should be done nationally as well. And I don't hear a lot of conversation on a national level about universal health care or single payer anymore. But like I said, it wouldn't preclude us from doing it, but we do want to do it right. We do want to do it right.
Please don't let my mother hear you say that. My mother, who grew up in Canada and is a major single payer advocate, will say that it's definitely part of the conversation on the national level. But I take your point that
in
surely
Canada,
with the
sure, but it's
she's now an American citizen, so
right.
Another
and
question.
I'm glad you tell me your mom is a fan. I mean, like I said, we should do it nationally. We should do it right. And if we have to be leaders, we want to make sure that we're not leaving anybody in the lurch. I want to make sure. And let me just add that we've got workforce issues in healthcare too that we have to address, because right now you see with COVID, the staffing in hospitals, and it's just not there on every level. So, it's a big issue. And the ideal, we say we love the ideal, but we want to, if we do it, we got to make sure it works. I can't leave anybody out there without what they need.
I should say I'm the son of a socially liberal single payer healthcare advocate mother and a fiscally conservative Republican father. So that's
there you go. And look at you,
a portrait of a divided nation. So and another question offered up by a couple of people: what will be do you think, major legislation related to climate change that's going to get addressed in this legislative session?
Oh, wow. Well, again, I think we have the most aggressive climate action plan, and we are, I think, moving in the direction that we need, but we need to do so much more. I know that the governor has put in this budget, this $4 billion. She boosted it up $1 billion in terms of the infrastructure for making sure that we are able to make ourselves resilient and strengthen ourselves against climate change. But we've got to figure out how to fund a lot of the initiatives that we put in. We have our Climate Action Council that will be working with us and helping to inform us as to different policy issues to bolster our overall plan. But we know we have to do more, and we will be doing more. And we've got to get to our zero emissions goals. We've got to move away from our fossil fuels. We know all that, and I can't tell you what, but I can tell you there is a lot more that we will do this session.
Two very quick, sort of more granular questions about specific legislation. Whether you can say anything about a Senate bill that is currently moving that would change requirements for construction of voting machines. I don't know if you're familiar with that piece of legislation.
I don't know that I mean, I know there's some concern around voting machines that Senator Myrie has raised in our conference, and I've had some constituents who are also very concerned about it. So I cannot tell you that I know specifically what the legislation does, but I do know that it has the attention of our chair of elections.
And then finally, just a question about a bill that would amend employer contributions to the unemployment insurance fund.
amend employer contributions.
That is literally the entirety of the question. So if it is perhaps if it's not specific enough, that's okay. So
yeah, I mean, certainly, yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Why don't I not expound on it?
Yeah. I should probably be able to offer more detail on that before I ask you about it. So just a final question. This year marks 10 years since you were elevated to leadership of the Democratic Conference. In December, it'll be 10 years exactly. And I guess after you've done something for a decade, even though of course you weren't in the majority for that decade, I guess the question always is presented: how much longer do you want to do this? I guess what. This could be the subject of another hour's discussion, but I guess if I were to ask you what the big takeaways or the sort of secret to your really relative longevity at the top of the Democratic Conference is, what would you ascribe it to? And also, is it something that you hope to do for another 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 8 years?
Okay. First of all, I will say that I was surprised. I was surprised to actually be in this position and very humbled. I am, as you know, the first woman that's ever led a conference. And the opportunity came after, difficulties that had happened in the conference. And, I don't want to give you PTSD remembering all the different things, but a lot of times people who would not normally be considered for positions do get considered because, a change is necessary. And so when my colleagues suggested that I lead the conference, I did because they had faith in me. And frankly, I have faith in them. So I think the secret to my longevity has been that I believe in what we do. I believe that we do it on behalf of the people of New York State. And I have never, ever seen, frankly, a more committed group of people who serve, certainly in the Senate and in the persons of my conference, that have brought that attitude with them every single day. So it's really been an honor of a lifetime, and it's important. And so how long I do it, if most people know me, they know I focus on the task at hand and the moment that I am in. I figure if you pay attention to what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, the future kind of takes care of itself. And that's kind of my philosophy.
And speaking of longevity, I would just ask you a question related to the Legislative Correspondents Association. We just learned of the imminent departure of Tom Precious from the Capitol. I would just ask you to imagine what the Capitol would be like without Tom Precious covering it, that we'll all have to deal with now.
I don't know. And I would imagine that, he's leaving while he's got a governor in there. He's a Buffalo guy, right? So I can't imagine. He really is, he's quite a presence here. So I, just like you, I'm sure that we wish him well in whatever that next chapter is, but I think we've all been better served because of his coverage of what we're doing here. And, I said, I can't say enough because I'm a former journalist, as you might know, but the importance of local coverage, the importance of, Times Union, the Buffalo News, even in my hometown, the Journal News. It's just so important that people support their local media and, respond to stories you like, stories you don't like, but you are so important to making sure that democracy is actually which is the cornerstone of our great country, is actually, part of what we in government are doing. So I'll miss Tom. You don't go any place, please, because you're another jewel. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate that very much. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for taking this hour to talk to us. It is, of course, important that public officials make themselves available to answer questions. You have always been there for that duty, and I very much appreciate it. With that, I'd like to thank all the people who have listened in to this Times Union Upstate business discussion. I would like to thank our sponsor, the Martin Group, as well as the Times Union's digital team for making this possible, especially our multimedia producer, Jessica Marshall. As I said, this will be a quarterly discussion, so please check back in. And everybody, please get vaccinated, get boosted, stay safe. Thanks a lot. I'm Casey Seiler from the Times Union. Leader, thank you so much.